Welcome back to the McCann Dogs podcast, episode 57 of our podcast. And today we're talking about a rather controversial topic when it comes to dog training. This is something that, usually stirs up some controversy. And I think instructor Shannon has really done a great job at communicating what we've seen as professional dog trainers over the 40 some odd years that McCann Professional Dog Trainers has been in business. And I want to get right down and dirty with some dog training myths. And the title of this article that Shannon has created is Dog Training Myths, the Rest of the Story. I'm Ken Steep, and welcome back to McCann Dogs. So Shannon, this one is near and dear to your heart. I think we often, certainly dog training, there are lots of myths, there are lots of opinions, and there are lots of facts. And I think that everyone is entitled to their own opinion, but they're not entitled to their own facts. And this article that you've created really dispels some of those untruths, those myths, those ideas that people may have about dog training. Now, I know that this is a very passionate topic for you. And was there some event, something that you had been seeing? What was the reason that you felt it was important to publish this article?
There's a lot of repetitive messages that float around on the internet and on Facebook, and these are three that I've been seeing a lot lately. And I thought there's so much more to these stories than what these little memes that are popping up all over the place are able to address. And it's like with anything, right? You get this immense topic and you break it down into subtopics. And then in those subtopics, you have little quips of information. And of course, the quips of information don't tell the whole story. They only tell that little quip. So if I experience it with things that are outside of my worldly knowledge, right? So dog training obviously is something that is in the forefront of my mind all the time. And I can pick out the fallacies very, very easily because I have the experience of 20 years of actually training dogs under my belt to be able to say, no, that's not going to work at all. Or, yeah, I love that idea. I'm going to try that idea and, see if it can evolve my training a little bit more. So within these quips, I find that there are some things that are starting to be very borderline dangerous in spreading just that little bit of information and leaving a ton of room for filling in the blanks on a topic that people maybe are not as well versed in as they should be to fill in those blanks. So, as an example, if I was going into an industry that was foreign to me and I simply had, one little piece of information and then tried to go and put out fires, for example, with just that one little piece of information. You need water to put out fires. Okay, that's great. But there's all sorts of different elements of fires. There's all sorts of different materials that you don't want to put water on, and as a firefighter, you would be able to recognize those fallacies instantly. No, you don't want to put water on a gas fire, et cetera, et cetera. But if you don't have the experience in that, you might run with just that idea of water is going to work to put out fire. That's great. So I wanted to delve into some of these things because I was starting to get concerned with how often I was seeing some of these messages. And that's what today's blog post is about.
I think that one of the really important things that we need to keep in mind, especially in today's society where we have access to so much information, but we often find ourselves in these little echo chambers where we communicate with people that have the exact same beliefs that we do, that we expose ourselves. The algorithms, for example, whether it's YouTube or Facebook or Instagram or whatever, it starts to pick the ideas that you would agree with because of the social signals that it gets from those things. I know that a tactic that palm readers, and we're getting a little off topic, but a tactic that palm readers will use is they'll use a very specific trait or piece of information. They'll say, for example, by looking at your hand, I can see that you can be quite stubborn. And psychologically, what we do is immediately search for confirmation. That's just how our brains work. We look for confirmation in a statement, especially if it's something about us, and we'll be able to pluck those things out. Now, what a researcher did is first time he had spoken to this one person, said you can be quite stubborn. And the guy said, well, yeah, I can certainly be quite stubborn. And then later, a couple of hours later, he said, you can be really flexible, when you're dealing with things. He said, well, you're actually, that's right. I'm quite flexible. So we look for these confirmations. Now, what we need to really do, and what we pride ourselves on at McCann Dogs, is being objective, looking at the results. We're always changing with small tweaks in our dog training as we move along. We do different orders, different patterns, different things, but ultimately the objective is the same. And we're always so focused on having our students be successful, having us be very successful in delivering information. And I think this is such an important topic, especially right now when social media is ablaze with different ideas and different methodologies. So let's get into your article. What's the first thing when we talk about dog training myths that comes to mind that you'd like to address?
Yeah, and this is the one that I'm seeing a lot popping up on my news feed on Facebook, and that is the idea of asking your dog for consent. And this is an idea that, as a broad idea, okay, that's all well and good. But when you start to narrow it down to situations and scenarios where you might not get consent from your dog, it becomes concerning because you're not always in the position where you can walk away and come back and try again later. I personally think that's a really poor way of going about dog training to begin with. I think that we should always stay in the moment and keep working through until we get the end result. And unless you've worked it out ad nauseum and your dog's tired or they're worried or there's something external going on. But if it's a situation where you need to take your dog to the vet and they need to be examined, you don't have the option of saying, oh, he didn't agree to consent to have the vet touch him, so we're going to have to go home now. You might have a dog with an ear infection. You might have a dog that is sick. They need to be able to be examined by the vet. So I thought this little quip, it doesn't answer what in my head become three main questions. And one is, what do you do when you don't receive consent from your dog? One is, what do you do when you don't receive consent from your dog and you have no choice but to move forward? You have to handle them. That scenario at the vet where, the vet needs to look at their ears because they're badly infected or something of that nature. The dog, chances are they're in pain. They're not going to grant consent. So we need to have training and things in place that say to the dog, sorry, buddy, I know this hurts. However, you need to comply because it's for your own good. And then the third question that I had is, where is the information to help people understand, first off, when the dog is not consenting, why they're not consenting, and what you need to do to turn that no into a yes. So those three questions in my mind need to be addressed when it comes to anything dealing with consent. And I use the analogy, I do ask my dogs for consent. There's no question there because I don't want to ever just say, darn it, dog, you're going to give me your paw and I'm going to trim your toenail. We don't want to be tyrants with our dogs. We want them to enjoy all of the things that we need them to participate in. So as an example, when I'm trimming toenails in my house, I invite the dog up onto the grooming table. I never have an issue with that because they love it up there. They get lots of reinforcement up there. And then the first thing I will do is I will put out my hand for one of their front paws. And most of the time, 99% of the time, I readily get a paw put in my hand because I usually will reinforce that. Jumping up on the grooming table and giving me your paw gets you a cookie just about each and every time. However, there's going to be times where you don't get consent. And if I invited either of my dogs up on the grooming table, asked for their paw and didn't get it, I would not simply say, oh, he didn't consent, so we'll trim toenails later. I would reach in and just gently run my hand down my dog's leg, pick up his foot, and then go ahead with the nail trimming. And they wouldn't get the cookie for that. So I am not being rough. I'm not saying you're a bad dog, but I need to trim your toenails. And as an adult and as the responsible person in the relationship, I understand that that is an important thing for foot health. It is so much better for you if your nails are kept short and if I do those nails once a week. So you don't have the option of saying, no, you can't do that. But if you are compliant and if you are cooperative, you get great things. So it's definitely well within your while to be cooperative, but you don't have the option of saying no.
With the consent line of thinking, I mean, I don't really understand it, I guess, that well. But where's the opportunity for growth? Like, identify a challenge, work through a difficult situation, and come out on the other side with a dog who's motivated, confident. I mean, I think there's a bit of a breakdown there when it comes to introducing your dog to new things.
Yes, definitely. And I think that if we fall into the habit of always letting the dog make the choices and make the rules in the house, we're actually setting ourselves up, and we're doing such a disservice to ourselves and our dogs, because of course they're dogs. They have other desires. You know, they'd rather sniff the poop out in the yard probably than come into the house when you call them to come into the house. They don't have the option though of making those choices, because we are the adults. We are the ones that have to say, you know what, it's time to come in the house. You just need to do it. I'm not chasing you around for an hour. And hopefully you've set yourself up to get positive responses in any of those scenarios. So with the asking for consent thing, I would never simply go up to a dog and insist that they allow me to handle them without prior training. It's so important to have worked through all of this handling and making sure that your dog understands that you touching them is a very positive thing, and you trimming their toenails is not something that they need to be afraid of, and you grooming them is wonderful. And the vets, you know, even though innately they might be afraid of the vets because they go there and sometimes not so pleasant things happen, it's so important that you've at least done the work getting up to that point where your dog understands how to be handled. They understand how to be still when you've asked them to. You know, Reggie, my old boy, he is, I would say, fearful in very few situations, but when he's fearful, he's extreme, and he turns off. He won't take food. You know, he can be very overwhelmed when there's social pressure involved. And of course, at the vet, that's extreme social pressure, with the vets leaning in, the vet techs putting them in headlocks, taking their blood, et cetera, et cetera. So with Reggie, rather than just say, oh, you know what, it's going to be a nightmare every time we go to the vets, I have worked so hard on all of the things that the vets and the vet techs might do to handle him. And I've associated those things with very pleasant things, but outside of the veterinarian scenario. And that's what's enabled Reggie to get through those situations where now he feels this social pressure and the terror starts to take over his head. I can say, hey, buddy, you know, get in between my legs sort of thing. And I will stand over him with my hand under his chin to support him. And he relaxes in very nicely in that position. And that way, if they need to take blood, they can go in through his neck or they can go in through his paw. I've got control of his head, but in a very gentle way where he understands this position. You know, we have done a lot of work at home with him in this position and lots of really, really good rewards and reinforcement so that I have those things to rely on now that I'm in the scary scenario where he might not offer consent, but I can say, hey, buddy, I gotcha. You don't need to worry about it. I know you don't want to be here and you don't want to do this, but it's for your own good. And we're going to get through this together. So he's got that background and that history. And that is so important. You don't ever want to take the dogs into a scenario and just insist and then weather the battle that's going to come from that.
I had a vet say to me one time that they really like when our students come in, and I thought, well, that's one of the nicest compliments I've gotten as a dog trainer. But she said that we put so much emphasis on handling with our puppy students, you know, that it's really important that you can examine your dog, that you can handle your dog's legs and feet and their ears and these things. And the vet was just so impressed at the students that would come, of our students that would come in to see her, and all of her techs agreed, it was just such a nice thing. But it's an inevitability. Your dog will need to go to the vet. They will need to be handled, and it's already a stressful experience. We just in the last couple of months, we had an unfortunate situation where a dog got really sick, and we were at the vets a lot, and it's already a stressful thing. So to have your dog be more comfortable, to be more confident, to not be fearful while they're being handled, it's just that. It's just such a nicety. But like I said, at some point in your dog's life, they're going to need to be handled. So it's so important to give them, even if they don't love it at first, to train through that, to really help them to be successful, to reduce the amount of stress.
Definitely. And to teach your dogs that fighting with you in any way is how they get their way, or withdrawing or pulling away from. it's such a terrible lesson. I never want my dog to think, "Oh, I just hold out with whatever I don't want to do and you go away." Because then my dog is controlling what I'm doing and in a very negative way. I need to make sure I teach my dogs that, you know what? Yes, consent is a nice thing to ask for, and if you don't grant it, sorry buddy, we're going to go through with this grooming process anyways because that's just the way it is. And then of course, once they settle in and relax and you're working through this and they're happy or they're at least calm, you can reinforce that and you can build the idea that complying and being cooperative is what gets them all the rewards in life. Doing the opposite of that gets them nothing. It doesn't get them all the good things.
And I love how you segued into the next point in your article about never saying no and the idea that that your dog's never wrong. I think diving into this next part is such an important element of dog training, and really understanding how to help your dog to be right is to let them know that they're wrong sometimes.
Yes, definitely. And there's a lot of information out there, and I really don't understand the motivation behind it. The barrage of information out there that is designed to make us feel guilty for telling our dogs no. And I'm sure that it's the same with children. There's always going to be huge debates in how to rear children and how to rear dogs. There's absolutely no question that there's always going to be disagreements, but I truly don't understand the motivation behind not giving the dog a fair chance to learn both sides of the equation. You know, if I only tell my dog when he's right, how do I set that up when he makes mistakes? How do I give him feedback when he makes mistakes? And I think some of the motivation behind it is probably fighting the idea that every time you say no, it's something harsh. It's a correction, or it's, you know, a leash correction, or a intimidation tactic or something of that nature. No, it's not at all. You can say no without being harsh or punitive. You do not need to be harsh with most dogs. In most scenarios, it's easy to just say, hey, and interrupt the behavior. And then when you get your dogs redirecting and attention focused back on you, you can tell them what you want them to do instead. So, you know, for example, Reggie. Good old Reggie, I'm painting him in this podcast. He loves poopsicles. He loves wintertime and poopsicles in the yard. If I simply waited for him to stop eating them so I could tell him he was a good dog, he would never understand what it was that I was asking him to do. So what I need to do is take away the rehearsal and the reinforcement of him eating those poopsicles, which means I need to tell him no when he's thinking about them. When he sees one in the yard and I haven't picked it up yet and he heads over to it, I need to say, hey, Reggie, leave that, so that he knows that is not acceptable. And if he picked one up, I would let him know that he needed to drop it, that was wrong. And then I can tell him how to be right once he's dropped it. I can say, what a good boy. You know what? Let's go up on the porch. You can lie down and I'll finish cleaning the yard. We can do all sorts of productive things instead of him eating that poop. But if I only told him when he was right, he would never be able to put that together. And I don't understand why I wouldn't want to give him as much information as I possibly could to help him be successful. There's nothing wrong with saying no. It does. I mean, you have to think about the intervention of human intelligence here. When we say no, we're not hitting dogs with baseball bats. We are using the calmest and easiest way of saying no that we possibly can. Sometimes that's going to be a little bit of a leash correction depending on what's going on. Most of the time it's just interruption, and it's just a means of giving the dog clear and total information on the scenario.
I know that when I think about things like the downstay, and you know, all of the dogs that we get to see every week, you know, what Shannon's talking about is something. It's not just an idea that she's had. It's her experience at McCann Dogs. We have more than 500 dogs come into the training facility every single week, and over since 1982, you know, there's more than 80,000 dogs every single week. Our head instructors have a meeting on Wednesdays, and they talk about every single dog in the program, where they really assess how the dog is doing, and et cetera, so that everyone can sort of offer some advice and suggestions, and you know, just sort of get a general overview of that dog's performance and maybe where they need to go next. But I know as a instructor, when I see someone that's working on something like the downstay, for example, if someone isn't clear with their voice the moment the dog gets up, and mark that moment and then go back and show the dog how to be right, the people that don't follow through, that maybe they'll bring out a treat, and they won't say anything when the dog gets up, but they'll just guide them back. Those dogs struggle the most, and come later in the program, those dogs are the ones that look more anxious. They look like they're not really sure what the expectation is, and our expectation is that they remain in position. The clearest and most fair way to help your dog to be right is to get in there and show them how to be right by replacing them in that down position. And I know that's a very specific example, but even in my experience over the past 10 years, and I'm just one trainer, that is something that was very apparent to me even early on. Now, what Shannon's talking about, I think you're absolutely right. I think that people who don't want to use the word no envision themselves as a tyrant when they use that no. When they think the idea of telling their dogs when they're wrong includes some sort of a physical assault, and that is we can't reinforce that enough. That is definitely not the case. Our focus is the dog's attitude. Everything we do is to make our dogs want to listen, and you don't achieve that through fear and intimidation. That's just not an efficient or successful way to accomplish that goal. So I think letting your dog know what's wrong really solidifies for them understanding what's right.
Definitely. Without question, I would absolutely endorse that 100%.
Now, something that we've talked about before, and something that's really very important, and something that resonates with our audience, is the idea of being a great leader for your dog. And I think some people of the same camp that think using the word no is bad might think that leadership is a bad word as well, and that's how you've titled the next paragraph. So let's talk a little bit about how the benefits of leadership, and how leadership can be perceived by some methodologies as being a bad word.
Yeah, so I think the problem is the word itself, and the word leader tied in with pack leader, which ties in with pack theory, which has been debunked. So now there's a facet of the dog training world that is trying to get rid of the word leader, because that makes people think of that the pack hierarchy stuff. I also think, though, that there's a big movement to try to put us on a level playing field. So I'm sure this has happened in parenting as well, where we're trying to put the kids on the same level as the parents, and we're trying to put dogs on the same level as the humans, and call us, partners and teammates and all that. And we are. There is zero question in my mind that my two dogs, when we are training, when we're competing, when we're doing anything, they're my friends. They're so near and dear to me. But I have the responsibility of keeping them safe, which means I need to be a parent. I need to be a leader. I need to be somebody who takes charge and takes responsibility and directs the dog where I need them to go, or how I need them to go in that direction. And that doesn't make me a tyrant. I'm not relying on old antiquated notions of pack leadership to call myself a good leader. The world was built on good leaders. Good leaders, good bosses are great leaders. Good parents are great leaders, and good dog trainers are great leaders as well. It's all about setting the dog up to do the right things. It's about making sure that you have enough information into the dog before you do things like take them off leash, for example. You've done the training that you need to, so that you're not going to be calling them ad nauseum and damaging your relationship, or having to get angry with them, or chasing them down, or any of those things. And it's about managing things in the interim so that they don't get into mischief while they're in the training phase. It's about knowing when to pick your battles, and knowing when to be a little bit looser with things. It's about giving good direction and showing the dogs how to be right, and making sure that you're using opportunities where they make mistakes to give them reinforcement for that. Leadership is not a bad thing at all. I strive every day to be a good, clear, calm, and kind leader to my dogs. And I would never want it any other way.
I know something you and I often speak about is being clear, consistent, and fair. And I think being a great leader is someone who really understands how to do that. How to teach your dog, give your dog the information that they need while being clear, consistent, and fair all the way through. Now, I'd love to help people have a deeper understanding of how dogs think and learn. And I think somewhere that they can do that, especially something that you've worked on recently, is this our free workshop. I think our free workshop is a great opportunity for these guys to dive in deeper to dog training, and it arrives in their email inbox every single month. So tell us a little bit about the free monthly workshop that you've created for our listeners.
Definitely. So every month, the first of every month, we'll be releasing a new fun free workshop. And the first one is an attention workshop. By the time we air this podcast, you will have access to the Cross Your Feet trick workshop as well. And then May 1st, we'll have another one coming out. So they are absolutely free. They're about 3 days each, and lots and lots of fun to work through. We're going to concentrate on obedience skills and tricks and fun games as well. So there's going to be lots of variety in the workshops, and we hope that you'll join us for them.
Now, I want to thank you guys for listening to this podcast. This can be such a polarizing topic, and regardless of what your opinion is in terms of methodologies, I think really we're all working towards the same objective. Have a dog who loves to work for us, loves to listen, loves to work with us. And, we've always had this sort of middle of the road approach to dog training. And that's a choice that has been made over the years, the evolution of dog training and the evolution of the McCann method. But it's based on success. It's based on the success of tens of thousands of dogs. I mean, that just can't be disputed. And occasionally we'll get, someone will reach out and they, maybe disagree with any sort of replacing your dog, any sort of leadership, for example. And they just, they just haven't had the exposure to dogs that McCann Professional Dog Trainers has. When we talk about our amazing staff, there's 16 full-time instructors that have bring so much to the table, have so much experience outside of family dog training. They do different sports, do different things. They've really, we have such an amazing team at McCann Dogs, and everyone, has input. Everyone shares their experiences, and that's really where the value of our understanding of how dogs think and learn comes in. And I know, Shannon, you're definitely a huge part of that as you create content for our social sites.
I think that one of our biggest successes stems from having open minds. So rather than painting ourselves into a methodology and joining a cult and saying we will only do things this way, we have these great big toolboxes because we keep an open mind to the methods that are out there. And I'm 20 years in on this, and I love finding new ideas. I love coming across things, which is why, I comb the internet for things. I'm not just sitting in the little bubble and hoping that a better method will fall on my lap. As I'm out there, I see things that I love, and I see things that I'm not so sure about, and I see things that I'm really eager to try. And whether or not they work is going to be found out down the road. So I think that's one of our biggest strengths, is keeping an open mind and knowing that not every problem is going to be a nail. They have that if your only tool is a hammer, you better hope that everything you come across is a nail, because otherwise you're going to be out of ideas. So hopefully you've got an open mind, you've got a big toolbox, and at the end of the day, you're comfortable with what you've decided to work with.
What's really important to remember for those listening at home is our perspective. We may have a grade 1 class with 12 students in it, and 12 different breeds of dogs, 12 different kinds of human students, how they learn. And every single dog may present a completely different training challenge. Maybe one dog's a little bit worried, or maybe one's really stimulated by motion, and maybe one dog doesn't like to take food. And it really drives home the point that there's no one way to train a dog. You do need to be versatile with, a sort of a common foundation, a common understanding of how you're going to achieve success, but you do it differently with every single dog. I think that's really an important takeaway for our listeners today.
I couldn't agree more.
And if this is your first time on our YouTube podcast, I want to thank you for joining us. Make sure you hit that subscribe button. We publish new videos every single week to help you understand the why behind how dogs think and learn. And on that note, I'm Ken, and this is Shannon. Happy training.
Bye, everybody.